everybody. My name is Hannah Joseph. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share my research with you today. This is the first opportunity that I've had to share this research for a variety of confidentiality concerns. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. Thank you especially to my advisor, Stephen Volk, and my project mentor, Meredith Raimondo, who have been my thought coaches throughout this process. And thank you to all my friends and family and supporters for continued support. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is not commonly noted in history textbooks. You hear about the Chilean dictatorship and learn about historical events and statistics about those who have been affected, but what is not often told is the narrative of survival, and I have 50 days to get back to you today. In this presentation, I will first explain a bit about my basic methodology and my personal role in this research. Then I will present the historical information about the Chilean context. And finally, I will relate a narrative that is a composite story with elements of many different case studies that I collected while I was conducting independent research in Geneva, Mars in last May 2011. This research began when I was studying away in Chile, and I had a month to conduct independent research. My public health professor actually gave me the name of the director of a program called CRISE, the Program of Reparation and Integral Health Services and Human Rights in Geneva, Chile. This healthcare program was created with the return to democracy to provide healthcare services for survivors of political repression during the dictatorship. So thus I conducted an exploratory study during that month using Chilean psychological theory along with healthcare policy that was created during that transition to democracy. And both of those academic literature really supported the core of my project, which was personal interviews that I conducted with ex-political prisoners, administrators, and healthcare professionals of the CRISE program. So I consider the official, governmental, along with the social, informal social support networks that exist currently for survivors with an unspeakable history of suffering. In Chilean society, personal narratives of recovery are largely excluded from public discourse, and the events of the dictatorship are still not openly discussed, even today, 22 years after the return to democracy. The Chilean National Commission of Political Imprisonment and Torture, commonly referred to as the Valich Commission, reports that the majority of survivors almost never referred to the suffering they endured, not even to those closest to them. I was therefore interested in what supports exist for survivors in the absence of that public acknowledgement. It was really imperative for me in this research to consider my role. Obviously, as an outsider in all ways, one would think that that would be a great challenge. And I did face some difficulty sort of in testing. I encountered that individuals wanted to test me for trustworthiness before I began conversations. But actually my age, nationality, and my status as an undergraduate researcher really helped me in, it characterized the personal relationships I was able to have. The fact that I'm the age of the grandchildren of many of the survivors really was helpful to me because many grandchildren did not want to hear the personal stories, and I was able to sort of fit into that role, but with the humility of an undergraduate and the outside perspective of an American. Though, so once I returned to Oberlin, I wanted to ground my research conclusions from my fieldwork in academic literature. I looked to the discipline of history for historical context, psychology for some theory on the individual experience of survival, and anthropology for the cultural context of those how different trauma studies can be applied to different cultural contexts. Though much of the work that I've done up until now has been theoretically based, I decided it would be most appropriate to relate with you a case study. And before I begin that, I just want to give you a little bit of historical information about the current historical moment in Chile. Beginning in 1970, when Salvador Allende was elected the first socialist president on a platform of social and economic equality that threatened rightist hegemony. Historically, Chile has been fairly equally divided between what we consider typically progressive leftist, rightist conservatives, and centrists. And during this era, the conservative sector set about a series of initiatives to undermine the government, which ultimately led to the military insurrection of 1973. This coup initiated 16 years of systematic repression, which was designed to transform society to an individualistic and capitalist society using the tools of neoliberal economic reform and state-led terror. Policies of general terror were conducted under the assumption that any person could be subjected to the repression at the hands of national forces purportedly designed to provide security for its citizens. The regime allegedly targeted those who participated in or supported the Allende government. However, many were targeted with no relevant political information or participation. Tactics used included torture, kidnapping, disappearances, assassination, exiles, and general terror. And each of these tactics were used to break down the social ties that composed a shared national identity, reducing that to a collection of individuals. There are no exact national statistics on the number of individuals who were affected by this violence. The numbers that do exist are from official accounts of testimony from the Truth and Reconciliation Committees that have been held since the return to democracy and continue to be held today. Thus, the numbers that are recorded sort of increase with each commission. Currently, there's a population of 17 million people in Chile, and the official record of those dead and disappeared during this period are 3,500, and at least 40,000 political prisoners have been recorded. Of those, 94% said they had been tortured. And these numbers come from the Ballage Commission from August of this past year. The Chilean Ministry of the Interior estimates that overall 800,000 people were directly affected by this violence, and that number doesn't include the social impact of any one act of violence. So if you imagine any one direct victim, as they're deemed by this commission, had friends and family and neighbors that all experienced some sort of mental trauma. Instead of using this time to spout theory at you, I have chosen to develop a narrative composed of parts of different stories from personal interviews that from my experience speaking with ex-political prisoners in Viña del Mar, Chile. I've decided to use this format because of confidentiality issues. I could not relate to you the story of any one individual, but I will use a pseudonym and aspects of many real stories to allow you to sort of understand how theory can be applied in context and allow you to understand the individual experience of survival. So now I'll introduce Rosa, who is a 16-year-old, she was a 16-year-old organizer for a socialist student group, still in high school when she was first arrested and detained at the start of the dictatorship in 1973. All manner of interrogation tactics were used to get her to forcibly confess to a variety of personal actions and alliances, whether they were true or not. When she was mysteriously released, 1 year after repeated attempts by human rights organizations to free her, she was exiled to England. Rosa's closest friend was released from imprisonment and also exiled to England only a few months after. Though they had relayed all details of their personal lives since childhood, the two friends never spoke of their shared history of imprisonment. The law of impunity established in Chile during the dictatorship in 1978 was not overturned in the return to democracy and set an official tone for public silence about this historical era. The inability of many survivors of violence to share their personal experiences with many close family members and friends inhibits an important resource. Shared emotional intimacy can protect survivors of repression from developing traumatic disturbances, so says psychological theory. The construct of social support is used to describe this factor of resilience, which most basically means the exchange of resources between at least two individuals that is intended to enhance the well-being or life circumstances of the recipient. Each person's social support network is composed of a variety of relationships within a community, including with all those relationships I just mentioned, coworkers, friends, neighbors, etc. Because issues of the Pinochet era are avoided socially, even within close relationships, survivors of political repression hold the burden of violent memories that cannot be openly shared. The social taboo of this historical period, along with psychological impediments to emotional intimacy, can inhibit social support and thus mental health recovery. In the 20 years Rosa lived in England, she married a fellow Chilean ex-political prisoner and had a child. Rosa decided to move back to Chile after the return to democracy. Her daughter stayed to attend college in the UK, and she and her husband returned to Chile only to split up after a series of affairs and violent fights. Currently, Rosa lives alone. While Rosa was living in England, Pinochet officially dissolved leftist political parties. After returning to Chile, Rosa found herself divorced, living far from her daughter and without the political party that had provided a strong sense of belonging and purpose for her, and working towards common goals of social betterment. The Balch Report documents that many ex-political prisoners experienced social challenges, including conflict, ruptures in family relationships, loss of social support networks, and difficulty finding and maintaining work. Perpetuated violence within families of survivors is an unfortunate reality for many. Rosa has engaged in ongoing mental health therapy for 10 years. Even after reaching some stages of mental stability, bouts of depression can suddenly overwhelm her. Many ex-political prisoners experience shifts in interests, attitudes, and aspects of their identity. Common psychological manifestations of suffering inflicted on political prisoners include anxiety disorder, depressive disorders, psychosomatic disorders, couple dysfunction, personality disorders, psychotic disorders, sleep disorders, and specific phobias related to practices of torture. Rosa suggests that the best therapy for her has been coming to feel useful in society again. She explains that one who has been marginalized from society for so long comes to reinsert oneself socially. This experience of reinserting oneself socially is an extremely powerful process, and being with fellow survivors of political prisoners is what makes Rosa remember why she wishes to live. She's now 55 years old. Her hands remain shriveled and scarred as a physical reminder of the painful use of cutting as a torture technique in confinement. Though it is impossible to determine the exact cause, physicians have explained to Rosa that the autoimmune disorder that has caused a loss of pigmentation in most of her skin is probably the result of stress she experienced as a survivor, as a prisoner. Rosa was lucky not to have any of the dental problems that many other survivors develop as a complication of the electrical current applied to the mouth during torture. She does not openly discuss what happened to her. Rosa's co-workers and much of her family, friends, and neighbors do not know what she experienced during the dictatorship. Even after the publication of testimony from the National Truth and Reconciliation Committee and the Balch Commission, there is little public discourse in Chile about this historical period. Though the Museum of Memory opened in 2010 to reflect the experience of victims of human rights violations during the dictatorship, the Chilean public remains divided in its interpretations of these historical events. The date of the coup and the statistics of the number of individuals who are affected have been published, but in Truth and Reconciliation, the truth that is missing is that of the suffering, fear, and dreams of survivors. The connection missing is that between their lives and the national history of violence, conflict, and resistance. Even the process of compiling this case study I found to be illustrative of the general silence around violence. I found that even after extensive conversations with different survivors, I did not have the details to trace any one narrative throughout this entire historical period. Though I sometimes learned details of one's personal life and history that his or her family did not know of, the social norm of silence around suffering saturated our conversation. As psychologist Elizabeth Lira of the Balch Commission argues, there is a therapeutic role in affirming the experience of the survivor. The Chilean silence around this military era perpetuates the marginalization of the violently oppressed. When the extent of violence is so great, society must take responsibility in some way to care for those most greatly affected. One way to do that is to acknowledge the suffering of survivors. That can happen regardless of political orientation. In conversation about that experience, we validate those stories and can help to fill that silence.